I'm going to read a little bit from my new book, Eli the Good, which came out in September. And I've recently decided that it was incorrectly published as a young adult novel. I wrote it as a novel for everybody, and it turns out that the publishing industry thinks that's a young adult novel. So some people come up to me and say, "I didn't buy your new book because it's for kids," and I'll say, "Well, it's for everybody, but okay." And so I'm going to read. Usually, I like to read small, little, short scenes, but I'm going to read one scene that's about 8 pages, 9 pages. This book is set in the summer of 1976, but it's about right now, really. And it's from the point of view of a 10-year-old boy named Eli Book who feels invisible within his family. His father's a Vietnam vet who has post-traumatic stress disorder and is not dealing with it, not getting treated for it. And his mother just chooses to deny that it's happening. Meanwhile, his aunt, Nell, his father's sister, has moved in with them. She's come home to die, and she is a famous war protester. So he's living in the same house with a Vietnam vet and a famous war protester at this point. And I think the only other thing you need to know here is that his sister is Josie, and her boyfriend is named Charles Asher. The noon sun was burning at the top of the sky before I went home again. I rode my bicycle into the backyard and saw my mother, but she was too far away to notice me. She probably wouldn't have anyway. The garden was at the farthest corner of our backyard, and she was crouched in the dirt studying her strawberry plants. Being a biology teacher, she approached everything like a scientist. I watched her as I put down my kickstand. Mom stood and brought up a hoe that had been lying next to her, then immediately began to chop out any weeds that had popped up in the last couple of days. I liked to work in the garden, but not in the hot part of the day like her. So I went on inside to make myself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, a meal I would have lived on if I'd been allowed to. As I came around to the screen porch, I saw that Nell was sitting there in her nightgown, drinking sweet tea, smoking Winston, and reading a thick paperback with a bright orange cover. Her legs were folded out on the seat beside her, one elbow propped on the arm of the glider. She was far away, transported by the book, and she hadn't noticed my approach. Her face was as peaceful as a pasture, smooth and free of worry as she read. She took long draws from her cigarette, concentrating particularly hard until she blew the smoke back out. I wondered what mystery lay behind her coming to us. We hadn't seen her in 6 months, and now she was all of a sudden here. She had stayed with us for short stints before, but this time she had brought all her albums and her green record player that ran on batteries and the few clothes she owned, so I knew she planned on staying a while. Nell was always wandering around the country, never staying in one place long. She had lived in Nashville and New York, Atlanta and Boston. Sometimes my mother called her a free spirit, in the kind of voice that let me know she approved of this lifestyle, for Nell at least. I opened the creaking door to the screen porch and stood there while Nell finished the page. At last she laid the book face down across her thigh. "Hey there, wild man," she said, as if I had just slipped in the door. "Where you been?" "Out riding," I said, and plopped into my mother's rocker. A breeze came down the valley and knocked the chimes together. "Why you still in your night clothes?" She glanced down at her gown as if surprised she was still wearing it. "I didn't feel like getting dressed, that's why," she said. "I just wanted to smoke and drink sweet tea and read my book. That's just about the perfect day, if you ask me." "What is it?" I said, nodding my chin toward the book. "A James Michener," she said. "It's so big. I'd never in this world read all that." "It has one of my favorite lines of all time in it," Nell said. "Only the rocks live forever." "What's that mean?" I said. There was a scab on my ankle, so I reached down to pick at it while we talked. "Well, I can only say what I think it means," she said. To me, it means that we might as well not worry about anything because we're all going to die anyway. Well, that's sad, I said, and at once wished that I hadn't. It seemed much too childish. The scab picking was producing a pleasurable hurt. I lifted it too far, and a dark bubble of blood stood around the edges. It's beautiful, though, don't you think? She said. Just the way the words go together, all perfect. Only the rocks live forever. It's a good truth. I appreciated that Nell was talking to me like a grown-up, but I had no idea what she meant. Still, I could see that the words flowed together like water over a riverbed. It was a phrase I would repeat in my head later on in the summer without really knowing why. I took off my Chuck Taylors and brought my feet up under me, sitting Indian style in the rocker. This produced a helpless feeling in my gut, rocking back and forth without my feet touching the ground. Somehow I knew that this was how Nell felt all the time, this wild stirring in the gut. Nell stretched, let out a yawn, her arms going out wide, her hands balled into fist. I usually don't sleep so late, she said, mid-yawn. But Josie and me sat up all night talking. I had heard them laughing and whispering to each other as their bedroom was right next to mine. For a while I had stood in my bed and pressed my ear to the wall, hoping to hear some secrets, but had caught only snippets and giggling. "How long are you staying with us?" I asked. "Why, are you already sick of me?" She smiled and took a drink of her sweet tea, which she drank from my favorite glass, decorated with a picture of Casper the Friendly Ghost, dressed as Paul Revere. "No, I don't want you to ever leave." She laughed at that and laid her head against the back of the chair, closed her eyes, stretched, arms jutting out with hands curled into fists again. "That may very well be the case," she said. "I might just stay here forever if your daddy doesn't run me off." "There's a picture of you in Edie's history book," I said. She opened her eyes then, but didn't straighten up right away. She didn't say anything, but the smile faded from her face. "The one of you in New York City when you were protesting. I know which one," she said. "Don't mention that to your daddy, all right?" "I won't," I said. "I've known a while, but I wouldn't tell him. It upsets him." She took a deep breath. I stopped rocking and felt a momentary defense for my father rise up in me. I was filled with the anger that he sometimes carried around behind his eyes. That's what it was like to be the child of a veteran. We're always caught between defending our fathers and not understanding them. "Do you feel bad for doing that?" I said. "For that picture being taken of you?" She sat up stiff again, and a tenderness spread itself out across her face, centering in her eyes, moving outward until it had changed the whole shape of her forehead and mouth. "No, Eli, I don't. Not for a minute." She shook her head a little. "You should never feel bad for doing what you believe in. Your daddy was off fighting, and he believed in that, and I was up in New York fighting against the war, and I believed in that." I didn't know what to say, so I just looked at her, feeling stupid and too young and full of some kind of longing I could not put a name to. "I hate that it hurt him," she said, "but at the same time I wish he could see I was doing it for him." Then she sat back again, and her eyes drifted out over the yard to fall into my mother. After a time I turned so I could see Mom too. She had squatted down again on her knees in the dirt. She had her hair pulled up in a tight bun, which made her look much older than she usually did. She was 33 years old that summer, and her beauty was in full bloom. "She's the best friend I ever had," Nell said, and turned back to face her. She had lit another cigarette and was still looking at Mom. "She's having a hard time out of Josie right now, you know." I clenched my hands before me and stared at the way my fingers fit together. "I know it. They fight all the time." "I tried to talk to Josie about it last night," Nell said, "but she's impossible. She just won't listen when she doesn't want to." "I know all about that," I said. "Lord God, she's stubborn, just like your daddy." "Well, he says you're stubborn," I said. "Does he now?" She laughed and took another draw off the cigarette. "He can't see that the real problem between us is that we're just alike," she said. "Where's Josie at now?" I